Welcome to another episode of the Eat and Drink Real Estate Podcast. My name is Adam Kasarovich, and today we have special guest Karen Anderson joining us.
Hi.
Thanks for
Adam.
coming on, Karen.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So could you give us a brief overview of what you do as a real estate attorney, including you said you do property tax appeals too?
I
Can you
do.
tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I've been doing real estate since I graduated from law school, which was 1986. So I've got quite a few decades of experience in real estate, and it's interesting because it always changes. And I started to do property tax appeals in 2017. Having a lot of real estate background, I found out about property tax appeals and how they can benefit Cook County residents who own property. And it was just something I wanted to expand on because Cook County residents, especially right now, are really experiencing a huge amount of burden with taxes.
Right. So is that what kind of inspired you to get into tax appeals?
Yeah, the funny thing is, tax appeals are a very it's almost like a simple thing, but it's really complex. So what I mean by that is people are entitled to appeal their taxes. There's no downside to appealing taxes, and tax appeals are the only way to reduce your taxes in Cook County. Now, sometimes there are things that allow you to get a refund on your taxes, but a tax appeal is the only way to reduce your assessed value, and once you reduce your assessed value, that leads to a reduced tax bill, because the way that the county determines or the state, I should say, determines your tax bill is by taking the your assessed value, and then once they take your assessed value, they multiply that by what they call the equalizer, and that is a number that, like right now, is about 3.0163. And what that does is the equalizer is actually something that allows all Cook County properties to be equalized with the state. Because like in Lake County, they do taxes differently. In other counties, they do it differently. So they want to make all of the properties as though they were equal in the state. And then they multiply it by your tax rate. There's not anything you can really do about your tax rate. There's nothing you can do about that equalizer. But the one thing you can do is reduce your assessed value.
So how do they calculate the assessed value?
So the assessor of Cook County is the one who determines your assessed value. And basically, you know what, I don't really know how they do it because it seems like a magic formula.
Right.
But what they take into effect is the size of your house, the age of your house, the location of your property, the sometimes small details like do you have a garage, how many fireplaces do you have. It really depends. And I'm kind of focusing in this discussion on Cook County because Lake County and some of the collar counties are a little more nitpicky about how they do it. So that's how the assessed value is determined. So in a property tax appeal, there are quite a few bases that you can use to determine, to try to do a tax appeal. And the one that we use the most is called equity. Sometimes it's called uniformity. And what that says is, hey, my client is paying this amount in taxes, and similar properties close by in their neighborhood are paying less, and we want you, Cook County, to reduce their assessed value to what these people have, because that makes it fairer.
I agree.
Yeah, so that's uniformity.
Okay, and then also things like doing improvements to your home, they can raise your assessed value, correct?
Right. A lot of times the assessor, that's how the assessor knows to raise your assessed value, is because you've applied for permits. Usually, they can also do it if they do a drive-by field inspection, but they're so swamped they don't usually do it. It's usually based on just like did you do a permit? So one of the things that a lot of people don't know about owning Cook County property is that you're reassessed every 3 years. So if you're reassessed every 3 years, so let's say, for example, last year in 2023. Lamont Township was reassessed. So Lamont Township was reassessed in 2023, so they're not going to be reassessed until 2026. And the assessor won't look at changing the assessed value until 2026, and that's when they've got like a mandate to do it.
So you can only appeal your taxes on assessment years?
No. that's the joy of tax appeals, is you can appeal every single year. And we recommend that our clients do that. Also, there are a few places to actually do an assessment appeal. And so you can do your assessment appeal at both the assessor level and at the Board of Review. And both of them have independent jurisdiction. So the assessor is the one who determines the assessed value, but the Board of Review is out there. And every county has a Board of Review. And they say, oh yeah, the assessor did a good job. Or they say, oh no, we have an appeal in front of us and we're going to reduce the assessed value. So the assessor does not like to say, oh, we made a mistake. So we don't get great results at the assessor level, right? Because they're not going to say, oh yeah, we said it was this, but now we're saying it's this. But at the Board of Review, we get quite a bit of success. So that's the focus.
Awesome. So what's the benefit to using an attorney on a tax appeal rather than just, filing it and, taking it to the county yourself?
Well, I think, of course, I'm biased because I'm an attorney.
Right.
But I think that there are quite a few reasons to use an attorney. Number one, they don't charge I think for the most part, they don't charge unless there's a success. Like, unless the appeal is successful, you don't pay. And what that means is if your attorney doesn't get you a reduced assessed value, you're going to be stuck with the assessed value that you've already gotten. So your tax bill is going to be that no matter what. And then you don't have to pay. The reason why you pay is because you sign a contingency agreement that says we'll pay a small fraction to the attorney so that we can get a reduced assessed value. And so what that allows the homeowner to do is they're not going to be out any money. They're either going to pay it all to the county, or they're going to pay it some to the county. And then what the reduction allows is some of that will go to the law firm, and then some of it will go into their pocket. Now, the reason to appeal on your reassessment year is that that assessed value that you get through your tax appeal will go out throughout every single year until you're reassessed. So if I reduce your assessed value by, let's say, $5,000, and so I reduce your assessed value from $20,000 to $15,000, your assessed value is now no longer $20,000, it's going to be $15,000, and then it's going to be $15,000, and then it's going to be $15,000. And then when you get reassessed, the assessor will probably increase it.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there ever any evidence you have to bring forth to the county to, successfully win an appeal?
And that's one of the reasons why you want to use a law firm as well. And part of that reasoning is the assessor and the Board of Review, they always have open hearings or training sessions, and they recommend that people come in and file a tax appeal, but they don't really tell you how to do it. So a lot of times people will file their appeal with the help of the county, and then they don't file their evidence. So they lose out because nobody's they're not going to get a benefit of a tax appeal, because if you don't file the evidence, you just get what they call a no change letter.
Right.
And I think it's misleading. I really feel, I have quite a few clients that say, oh, I didn't know there was something else to do. So what the attorney will do is most of us use proprietary software that allows us to find really good comps. That's that group of properties that we say, hey, these are the neighbors that are paying less. Mm-hmm. These are comparable properties, so therefore reduce the assessed value. And what's interesting is, let's say that we've got that property that's being reassessed right now, right? Or so you're at a reassessment year, and the assessed value is $20,000. And I say, look, Board of Review, I want you to reduce it. I want you to take the assessed value from $20,000 to $10,000. Now, and this is assessed value. There's other factors, of course, like I mentioned earlier, that lead to the actual tax bill. But the Board of Review in 2024 may say, we'll reduce your assessed value by $3,000.
Okay.
And I was like, but I want to go down by 10. So then the next year, I'll say no. Can we please reassess? Could you please appeal? I'm going to appeal this, and I say, can you please lower it by $7,000, because we wanted 10, we got 3, but now we want you to reduce it by 7. And they might say, oh, we'll do it by 4. So it's like, okay, so let's do it the next year. You're still not reassessed. You got a third year, so let's do it one more time. And each time we just chip away. So if we can chip away at it every single year at the Board of Review, I mean, you could chip away at the assessor, but I still don't feel like that's a really good way to get a result.
Right. But either way, you're saying it's a win-win for a homeowner to attempt to appeal their taxes, because if they don't win the appeal, they're not paying anything. And if they do win, they're paying less either way.
Right.
So it is a win-win.
Right.
So what advice would you give to people who are considering selling their home that can't afford their property taxes?
Well, I would say contact a real estate attorney, and preferably you could, I know our office does both property taxes and tax appeals. I don't know how many offices are out there that do that. But it's important that if you have a tax appeal going and you want, currently filed, you want to make sure that's taken care of in the real estate contract too, because remember, in a real estate contract, you give a credit for, you give a proration credit for taxes, and if you're getting assessed value reduction, you're going to be giving a little more credit than you need to. Number one, that's a possibility. And number two, you might be on the hook for the invoice that you've signed, or you've signed a contract with an attorney, and you don't get the benefit of that because you've sold the property, and but you got the liability of the, and it's usually not that much money, not when you're talking about all the other costs, but it is one cost that you could, consider, to give it over to the buyer, or at least be prepared, because the buyer is the one who's going to be getting the result, the benefit of the tax appeal.
Absolutely. And I could see that tying into doing real estate closings in a way that, well, a lot of times when somebody is selling a property, they could have a lower assessed value. They could have exemptions on their tax bill that gives them a lower tax bill. And when the buyer takes over, they see a sudden hike in their overall tax bill. So it might be beneficial for them to work with an attorney that knows the ropes on both ends and could prepare them for that, or even immediately go in for an appeal after a purchase or something like that. Right.
So there are a couple of ways. Another basis that you can do an appeal on, besides the uniformity or the equity that we call it, is based on sales price. So in Cook County, your assessed value is 10% of the fair market value. Generally, fair market value is considered what the assessor says it is, but they're supposed to be basing it on recent sales of property. So they look at 3 years, the most recent 3 years of sales, and that's how they determine what your assessed value is. So that's the one time I really do recommend that you appeal at the assessor. They don't always give it to you, but the one thing you can say is, look, the assessed value of this property is $50,000, but I bought it for $250,000, and it was an arm's length transaction. That's a very important part. And so based on our rules, your fair market value, it should be 10% of your fair market value, so 10% of $250,000 is $25,000, so therefore please reduce my assessed value from $50,000 to $25,000. And they generally do. You give them your closing statement, and you make a statement saying it's an arm's length transaction, and that's usually will give you a reduction. And a lot of people don't know that. On the flip side, there are a lot of people that they're getting a deal, right? That happened to a client of mine, right? She bought the house for $250,000. I reduced her assessed value to $25,000, but she got a deal on that house, and that house was really a $410,000 house. So when they reassessed her, they said, "Look, your house is worth $410,000. We're gonna up your assessed value to $41,000." In 1 year, they did that.
And that's where the fair market value comes into play.
Right, and so you have to be prepared. And a lot of attorneys won't tell you that. Like, you might look at an assessed value, and then, people are paying $735,000 for a house, and it's $73,500 assessed value, but your old tax bill shows it at $53,000.
Right. So does that come into play too when people are paying overinflated prices for homes too, as well?
Right.
So if you're paying $50,000 over what the house is really worth, are you going to sometimes see a tax bill that reflects the purchase price rather than the value?
Right. And that is a sticky one because, sometimes we argue both, right? Like I've had that where
Right.
it's like, look, they bought it for this. Now that's not an overinflated one, but when like the whole neighborhood's $1 million. No, I should say the whole million's 800,000, but the client buys it for 750. But they're assessing them at 1.2 million. So they're having a $110,000 assessed value, and I want to bring it to 75,000, but maybe even just 80,000 because everybody else is at 80,000, and that's why you want to have an attorney do it, right? 'Cause
Right.
it's very complicated. That
Exactly.
part, it's simple, but there's a lot of different nuances, and you have to know which argument you want to use and which one sometimes you want to avoid one of those arguments, but if you do if it's overinflated, you really want to be able to find comps that say, look, the real price of this house, we don't know why they overpaid, but they overpaid, and that's not what the Constitution of Illinois says, that it should be equitable and it should be uniform. And so that's how we have uniformity.
Well, awesome. That's great information. So, could you explain the attorney review period and why it's so important in Illinois real estate transactions?
Sure. The general real estate contract that we use up here in Cook County and in Lake County is the 7.0 contract. That's what we call it. It's fairly recent, and the attorney review period in that states that there are 4 things that a attorney can look at when they look at the review, and it says the attorney has 5 business days from the date that the contract is accepted by the seller, and then those 5 days the attorney looks at it and sees it's a template contract, so you know what to expect. You look to see what little things are different. You want to look at the different terms of the contract, the contingencies. Is there a sale of another house? Do they want to stay does the seller want to stay in the property? These are all things that can be red flags. You want to find out from your client what the condition of the property is, because there's also going to be an inspection, so you don't want to have any surprises. So you want your attorney in that time period to review all the details, and your attorney and you, the seller, can decide, do you want to accept the agreement? Do you want to just decline the agreement? Or do you want to make proposed modifications? And there's 2 subsections of proposed modifications. There's one subsection, it's called 10C, and the other one is 10D. And 10D, we're going to go down the contract. 10D says if you make modifications and you don't want them to be considered a counteroffer, then you have to say, I'm making proposed modifications pursuant to clause 10D. And if you don't do that, you're making it pursuant to 10C. And what 10C says, these proposed modifications are a counteroffer. And it also says it doesn't matter if the contract even says these proposed modifications are not a counteroffer. Unless you mention 10D, it's going to be considered by Illinois law, contract review, it's going to be considered a counteroffer. So that puts the kind of the status of the deal could put it in jeopardy.
Right, and that's why we use attorneys. I feel like if we didn't, it would kind of be the Wild West as far as contract negotiations go.
Right, and this contract, this new 7.0 contract I don't know if he was the sole author of it, but I know that the person who did it is been in the business for longer than I have. So I know that he has a lot of experience. They tried to cover every base with this contract. I'm pretty satisfied with it. The thing is, as a seller, we get a lot of buyers who say, oh, these are proposed modifications, but we don't want you to consider it a counteroffer, but then they don't mention the other clause. And then I always write back and say, well, thanks for your counteroffer. Here's what I have to say. And people think I'm being a stickler, but it's what part of the contract, what other parts of the contract do you not want to abide by? Do you not want to abide by the sales price? Do you not want to abide by the closing date, the possession date? I think it's pretty clear on this contract. It's either a counteroffer or it's just a good idea. These are the things we'd like you to consider.
Awesome. So everyone should use the 7.0 contract and probably not write, the terms on a napkin and turn that in.
I would recommend
this would be a little bit smoother.
Yes. And the thing about one reason that people use real estate agents is because they are the ones who can provide that contract. they don't always have to be the only one because the contract is copyrighted.
Right.
I am a member of an association of attorneys called the Illinois Real Estate Association, IRELA, Illinois Real Estate Land Attorneys. So, Lawyers Association, Illinois Real Estate Lawyers Association. Sorry, IRELA. Anyway, they actually allow their members to access the contract as well. So if you're doing a for sale by owner, you can still use this contract. So that if your seller or your buyer even is not going to be using an attorney, then they can, a real estate agent, then they can use this contract.
Awesome. So what advice could you give, agents trying to navigate this new legal change with buyer agent commission?
Right.
That's a sticky one that we've kind of been facing this year. So
have you had a lot of experience with it yet?
I have not. I tried as a title agent. I try to stay out of that aspect of it. I'll let the realtors and the attorneys duke it out.
Yeah.
I'm just the guy on the sidelines for that one.
Yeah. So what Adam and I are talking about is there's been a class action settlement in the National Association of Realtors, and how historically it's been is that the seller's agent would just pay a commission to the buyer's agent, and it was advertised in the MLS that would say, so the seller would list their property with the seller's agent, and they would say, okay, we're going to pay you a 6% commission. And then the seller's agent, the real estate agent, would then have an MLS listing that says, hey, of my 6% commission, I'm willing to give a buyer's agent 2.5% or 2% or 3% or 5% because I'm only going to keep 1%. Whatever, that's up to them what they would publish. And it was determined that was unfair business practices,
right.
Even though we've been doing it for decades, right?
Right.
So now I think basically what's going to happen is we're all going to end up we're going to do the same thing numbers-wise, because the number is still the number. The buyer's still willing to come up with a certain amount of money, and the seller's willing to take a certain amount of money and pay commissions accordingly. And so what this new development is requiring is that buyers have to have their own written agreement with their own buyer's agent. So now we never really worried about that as a seller's attorney. We would never really worry. We'd never look at that contract. And most of them didn't have it. Most buyers didn't have a separate contract, right? It was just somebody would send them to 5 different properties, and then they'd say, okay, we want to make an offer. They'd tell the real estate agent who sent them to the properties, here's the contract, make your offer. And so now they're spelling out in their contract, I think, what they're doing, because the balance of power really was in the buyer's agent, because the buyer could say, well, I don't want to send them to this house because they're only offering me a 1% commission, where if I show them this property, I'll get a 2.5% commission. And so that's really where the unfairness came.
Right.
And so now sellers are saying, okay, we're willing to pay part of that buyer's commission, or maybe the whole buyer's commission.
Right.
If the buyer's going to be responsible, we'll pay our seller 2.5%, because maybe the most that they're doing is just listing it on the MLS. Maybe they're doing open houses, maybe they're doing staging, maybe they're helping, depends on what the market's going to be. And then we'll pay, because you want your seller's real estate agent to sell it, right? So, you want them to get as many buyer's agents in there. So you say, we would be willing to negotiate paying the buyer's agent fee.
Do you think that you're going to start seeing buyers come in without agent representation at all?
I think it's got to be coming.
Yeah.
I think, people know that they can see the properties on the MLS.
Right.
Right. So I think that, I don't know if that's such a great idea.
Right.
That's going to open up now, because sellers are used to just having a lockbox and letting the buyer's agents access it. So now it's going to be a question. I know I've seen ads online for real estate companies that are just hiring people to let you in the property. Right? So it's just like...
Interesting.
Yeah. It's like, for $50, can you take the lock... I mean, you don't feel safe about that, right?
No, I don't know if I want random people walking around in my house.
I know. It's like, so it's going to take a while for all of these little details to shake out in the laundry.
Right. Okay. In your experience, how has the role of a real estate attorney evolved in the recent market with all the legal changes that have been going on?
Well, Illinois has always been a state that has, well, or at least I shouldn't say all of Illinois, but northern Illinois, because maybe
Right.
downstate you don't have it as much.
Oh, the market's completely different. I swear, like as soon as you leave the 7-county area,
Yeah.
you could go out to like south to Kankakee or up north to Rockford, and it's just completely
Yeah.
different how things operate.
Yeah,
So-
and so one of the things is that part of it, is I think part of that property tax, what people are paying in property taxes, knowing. I think people are just used to having an attorney in these more populated areas, willing to pay an attorney. Maybe even the real estate agent's commission is more than it is in those smaller counties, right? Or in other parts of the state. And so, if you pay a 6% commission on $1 million property, you're looking at a $60,000 commission that you're paying.
Right.
That's a big chunk of change.
Sure is.
So most attorneys don't pay or don't charge more than $1,000 in a residential real estate transaction.
Right. So what do you typically charge as a real estate attorney?
It depends. It really depends on the buy side and the sell side. There's a lot of new things coming out in in liability for condos.
Mm-hmm.
So to be a buyer, to be an attorney for a buyer, and to say, how much do you want to pay me to give you advice about the rules and regs and because I don't want to be responsible for telling you they're a sound condominium when I don't really have that financial knowledge. You can look at it and see, do they have enough, does the condo have enough reserves?
Mm-hmm.
Are they, a lot of condos have people that are sued, so
Right.
you want to look at all of those things. And so, like a typical single-family residential real estate contract an attorney might charge somewhere between $500 and $800. But looking at a condo, I don't know if I want to do it for $500 or $800.
Right. And the
Right.
reason you're charging more is not because you're greedy. It's because you're assuming more liability
Exactly.
and risk.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because
So-
you're telling, this happens all the time. I didn't know I couldn't rent my unit out. Or I didn't know that there was a cap on how many people could rent out their units. So,
Mm-hmm.
The market's good, you're living there, but all of a sudden you get married and transferred to California. Now you've
Yeah.
got this condo and you want to rent it out, and all of a sudden, no, you're not allowed. Either the regs say you can't, the condo regulations say you can't, or there's a cap and the condo is already rented out by that cap, and so you are not going to be somebody. So now what do you do?
Right.
You try to get it under the radar and rent it out, or you wanted to do an Airbnb. You thought it was a great property for an Airbnb, and your condo doesn't let you do an Airbnb, right? So those are the
Right.
reasons. Those are, people can find that out by reading the regs, but those you might not necessarily know, and you might not even know that you needed that when you bought the condo. It just comes up later on.
Right, and that's why it's important to have a legal expert to walk you through all those regulations and point out those important pieces of information that normally someone would probably overlook, because realistically, who reads the terms and conditions, and who better to interpret all the legalese and the jargon than an attorney, because
Right.
some of those regulations sound very vague, difficult to understand, and with a legal professional to basically make it more understandable, black and white, for a consumer, so they know exactly what they're getting into, and then there is no surprises
Right.
in the future.
And
So-
and I have a friend who bought a condo in California, and she was surprised to find out she couldn't get her flooring put in because she had to have it approved, because you have to have a certain amount of soundproofing. You have to have a licensed person install it. Well, the cost of doing that flooring now has gone up higher than she anticipated, right? And those are all the little things. We happened to have, we owned a condo in Chicago that had a lot of facade work. And there are a lot of rules on facade because of issues that had happened years and years ago in the city where parts of facade were falling down and killing people. So now all of a sudden you have to have the facade inspected. The condo building itself has to have the facade inspected, and I think certified every 2 years or something like that. But that kind of work can be expensive. First of all, you got to pay the people to inspect it and to certify it. But if there's something that needs to be some attention, it could be a special assessment.
Right. So real quick, so where's your firm located, and what areas do you focus on?
Well, I focus only on real estate and all of the things that I do: leases, I do property tax appeals, I do buy deals and sell deals. I'm a title agent for Citywide, so we write title through Citywide. I don't know, leases are one of the things, the other things that pops up, but there are a lot of times where people, have family members move in and they want to know how to do an eviction of the family member,
right,
and things like that. So those are things that I usually cover. I do some, even the non-real estate stuff, I'll do some small estate planning, because there are things in real estate that you can do to avoid probate.
Oh, absolutely.
So those are things that I try to consider that ancillary to representing a property owner, right?
Right.
So those are the things that they look at.
Well, that's a lot of good lot of good information there, because you have multiple areas of expertise in the field of real estate. So I mean, who better than to for who better for a homeowner to work with than someone that knows, like, oh, if you're purchasing this property, and you want to avoid further or future probate issues and stuff like that, you can direct them and show them how to put their property in a trust, things like that. You get them on the tax appeals if they plan on renting in the future or doing any improvements. Like, it sounds like you're already kind of set up to guide them through any path they want to take in terms of purchasing or selling a real estate property.
Right. And my firm is virtual. So I am officially the Illinois branch of a large firm, a 40-attorney firm in Michigan that is offices in California and Kansas and a few offices in different parts of Michigan. And that is called Cummings, McClory, Davis, and Acho. And that's a rather new thing. I've just been with them since July, but basically it's the same practice that I have had since 2017, which is kind of an extension of what I've had since 1989. So
right.
It's all the same thing. It's all me doing all the work. And the best way to reach me is by my cell, because I like people to call my cell, 312-543-8636.
Yeah, that's awesome, because so many, the biggest issue is communication with real estate, right? There's so many moving parts. There's so many different hands involved, and it could just take one person to drop the ball to make everybody lose their mind. So, like, quick communication is key, and it keeps everybody sane and happy at the end. Like,
right.
a lot of first time buyers or sellers too, sometimes they need a little bit extra love. They need to be updated and be shown that everything's moving along, and
right.
Problems in real estate transaction are way easier to deal with when they're tackled immediately rather than the day before closing. So
much, that's so true, because one of the things is people stew over things, right? If
right.
you tackle it right away, there's no time. You've come to a conclusion, a decision.
Right.
Get out of the deal, stay in the deal, give a credit, don't give a credit, ask for a credit, don't ask for a credit. Those to me are things that if the attorney sits on it for 2 days before they send it to the other attorney, things can happen, right? Maybe your buyer is going to be looking at other properties, and that doesn't necessarily help anybody, right? If you're a buyer's attorney and you've just spent time with them and you've gotten through the contract and now they're saying they're looking at something else, that's not I mean, that's not a horrible thing, but it's, it's not the best use of anybody's time if this deal is a deal that can work. And I can say, honestly, in the 1,000 closings that I've done in my lifetime, I've only ever had one that didn't close. Sometimes it took a little longer to close, but I have a very good track record as far as representing sellers.
That is a pretty impressive record. Probably one that's that's hard to beat.
Yeah, and sadly, it was my husband's boss who still did not close. I mean, what's the luck of that?
And it was probably his fault anyway.
They allowed somebody to have access to the property before the closing.
Oh.
I never recommend letting buyers move in before the closing, because they had to evict them, and they didn't buy the house. They didn't get their loan, didn't buy the house, and, an eviction had to be done.
And that's why you listen to your attorney.
That's right.
Well, on that note, it was a pleasure having you on, Karen. If you want real quick, how can somebody get a hold of you if they're looking to purchase or sell a real estate property or file a tax appeal?
Give me a call, give me a text, 312-543-8636. From there, people love to text. Like, boy, I saw you on a podcast. Can you please give me some information? Can you please look at my property and see if I can get a tax appeal? It's easy if you just text me and say, here's my property. Can you please get back in touch with me?
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Adam. It's great to talk to you.
Great speaking with you as well. It's been a pleasure.